welcome in everyone to another edition of the GSMC College Football Podcast, brought to you by the GSMC Sports Network. I'm your host, as always, Tommy Brzee. It is Thursday, June 27th, and we have a great show for you today. We're going to start talking a little bit about the Pac-12. It sounds like they might just be alive up there, up in the Pacific Northwest. Oregon State and Washington State are looking to add some teams here in the very near future. Want to break down who those teams could be and kind of how it could change the landscape of college football going forward. Then we'll get into an interesting thing called blue chip ratio. It's probably a term that you've heard before, but I want to get into why it's so important to winning a national title and get into kind of the trend that's formed over the last decade or so around that moniker, I suppose. And then I want to get into who can be the kind of spoiler of that moniker. Washington and TCU have done it the last 2 years. Kind of want to give you guys an idea of who I think could possibly do it this upcoming year. Definitely a ton of teams that kind of fit that bill a little bit, so we'll definitely break down those as they come. Then we'll get into Heisman Watch. This is the last conference. We've gone around all the Power 4. We're going to get to the ACC today. Maybe I'll throw in a Group of 5 segment tomorrow, who knows. But we'll get to those tons of guys that I want to zero in on today before we finish it off with a Hot Take Thursday. And I think this year is very, very important for a number of people, but especially Lincoln Riley over there in South California. I think this might just be the year that we point at when we talk about his career as a whole as the turning point one way or the other. But before we jump in, I do want to remind you all we get tons of questions and comments throughout the show, and the best way for you all to get your question on the screen, we can have a fun back and forth here, is to use the tip and donation link at the bottom of the screen, gsmcspodcast.net. It's a huge help not only to us here at the network, but to you all. You get to kind of have a fun, interactive experience here, and I think that's always good for the both of us. So definitely use the link at the bottom if you would like to, gsmcpodcast.net. But let's jump right in. Let's talk about the Pac-12 to start, because there is so much going on around the Pac-12 right now. As we all know, they kind of got left behind a little bit. 10 teams out of that league have left. It left Oregon State and Washington State kind of alone up there in the Pacific Northwest, being the Pac-2 as we call it at this point. They've hired a new commissioner, got rid of George Kliavkoff, brought in Teresa Gould, and some things are happening fairly quickly. They're being really aggressive, and the reason is very, very simple. If they are not at an 8-team league by the end of 2026, or by the summer of 2026, they're going to be in a lot of trouble. They will not be a conference anymore effectively. They will be two separate entities that will be independents, and that's something that they obviously don't want to happen. It will very much hurt their pull in the college football playoff discussions, will essentially take them out of really any shot to make it in a lot of different ways, and would kind of just leave them out there wandering even more than they are right now. So they have to get to 8 teams, and the question is, how do they get there? The question is, how do they kind of bridge this gap? And it'll be a really interesting thing to watch, because obviously the Pac-12 has gone under as much change as really any conference has over this conference realignment. I mean, we saw an entire conference crumble in the matter of about 2 months, really. So it was really remarkable to watch, and I think the good thing about this is you do have an opening, right? You have created this alliance with the Mountain West where you're going to be playing a lot of these teams this year. They're going to be able to see what it's like to come to Corvallis or come to Pullman and play a big-time game, and there's going to be a lot of those teams that you're going to be able to comfortably pay their exit fee to get out of the Mountain West, especially with some of the money that the Pac-12 is bringing in from the playoff implication. They got a little bit of a bump in the playoff revenue after it was renegotiated. Also, every school that left is forced to pay them money over the next 10 years. So they have a little bit of ability to kind of be aggressive in this market and kind of go after some teams that maybe are a little bit lower on the price mark, but definitely have, real value to you. And the question is kind of, how do they go about this? And what is kind of the path forward? Because Washington State and Oregon State, they kind of have to work as a team as of right now, at least off the field. Obviously, that would be a very interesting thing to watch on the field over the next couple of years, but you have a couple of different options here. And the AD of Oregon State actually said this. Scott Barnes, the AD of Oregon State, said this when he was talking about it. He said he thinks as of right now, 8 is the number. And I'm a little bit divided on that. I think I understand where he's coming from to a certain extent, where it gets you where you need to be, right? Which is you need to be a conference right now, and that's the ultimate goal. So that totally makes sense to me. That is priority number 1, is to stay alive in the conference game. And then maybe you have the ability to add some ACC teams as that kind of situation gets just a little bit more precarious day by day. Maybe they take the cake for the biggest conference collapse over the next couple of weeks, or next couple of months to years. But the reality is, there are some things that could happen that could, help the Pac-12 even more, to bring in some more people, to bring in some higher level teams than they hypothetically would bring in from the Mountain West. So there's that chance where SMU, frankly, if, the Pac-12 didn't fold the way they did last season, that's where SMU would be right now. I feel very confident about that. So I think that one would be very easy, especially if the ACC started crumbling, the same way we saw the Pac-12 do. Cal and Stanford rejoining, that's as easy as it can get, right? That really will not be much of a problem, I don't think, unless they get a better offer from another conference, which maybe Stanford could get an offer from the Big Ten just because of the amount of research money and the amount of academic prestige that they have, but I would lean that they wouldn't, but who knows? There are a lot of things that can happen with this, but the reality is there is that opening to possibly pull away some ACC teams as you get a little bit further down the road, and it'll be really interesting to watch, but for the time being, you absolutely have to bring in those Mountain West teams. You have to bring at least 6 in, and then if the ACC starts to lose teams, you can bring in 4 to 6 of those teams. Maybe it's Pitt, maybe it's Georgia Tech, maybe it's maybe you get crazy and grab Florida State because they're not, getting invitations from the Big Two. Who knows? There is a ton of different things that could happen. But the reality is, a lot of stuff has to happen fairly quickly. All of this needs to happen before 2026 because there's a lot of hoops to jump through in the legal realm when you get to adding teams to a new league. And it'll be fascinating to kind of watch this develop. But the big thing I want to get to is, who are the 6 teams that are going to be added? They got to get to 8 teams. They're likely all going to come from the Mountain West Conference, if I had to imagine at least. Who are those 8 teams? And I think there's a couple of them that are fairly obvious. There's a couple of them that are pretty much layups. And frankly, for me, it absolutely starts with Boise State. Boise State, to me, is the easiest choice and that there's ever really been for a group of 5 team jumping up to the Power 5. SMU was a little bit different because of the money resources they have in Dallas, but Boise State is right there. I mean, they've been the cream of the crop for the group of 5 for quite some time now. Andy Avalos did just leave that program, but Spencer Danielson is a very, very talented guy, did a great job with that defense, and brought in Malachi Nelson from USC. So I think that offense, along with Ashton Jainty, is just going to be insane this year. It makes a lot of sense on the football field, and I think their athletic department as a whole is very, very strong when you look across the Mountain West. And then the other team that I think is a pretty much layup in this, Fresno State will likely be one of those teams. Fresno State has become a solid product year over year. They sent Jake Haener to the NFL, and he's still hanging out on the Saints. So they're getting a little bit more of that credit around the world of college football. And more than that, their entire athletic department is really solid. There's very few sports that they really miss the mark on or they really, struggle at. So definitely would be a school that I absolutely think would be a lock to get in. And then San Diego State is the last lock that I have. I think there's almost no chance that they get left out because for a couple of reasons. Well, they want out of the Mountain West. They said that last season, then the Pac-12 kind of dissolved, and they decided they'll just be just fine in the Mountain West for the time being. So they want out. There's no doubt about that. You get the San Diego market in this, and also this is a very, very good athletic department as a whole. The football program has struggled the last couple of years, but has put together really good products in the last decade. And then the basketball team obviously has made really incredible runs, playing UConn a couple of years ago in the national title game. So there's some things here that you just have to look at. Definitely those 3 teams I think are pretty much locks. Boise State, Fresno State, and San Diego State I fully expect to be in that conference going forward. And then the other teams, I think UNLV would be at the very top of the list for the teams that you could take or leave. But I do think UNLV is absolutely a take. I think when you look at this team, there's a lot going right. Barry Odom being there as the head coach is huge. The Las Vegas market is the biggest draw to this team, though. There's no doubt about that. Playing in Allegiant Stadium is another big draw to this because It brings a little bit of more of that juice to a conference that will likely be a group of five, a high group of five conference, but a group of five conference nonetheless. Another team that I'm watching very, very closely is Colorado State. I think that's a team that definitely will have a lot to say about what kind of happens in this conversation, and we'll see kind of how they fall in this pecking order, because that's kind of what we're going to figure out over the next little bit in the Mountain West is who do people want, who do people not want. And this is a team that I feel fairly confident will get the call. And then you're kind of up for grabs. You have a ton of different teams that absolutely can be in that place. You have Air Force, you have Wyoming, you have Utah State absolutely could be in that. I'd lean Air Force. They've kind of had the best product on the field. That being said, Air Force has been an independent in the past, so maybe that's a little bit more comfortable for them, and maybe it's Wyoming or maybe it's Utah State. But the reality is it's going to be a very interesting conversation. I think the first three that I mentioned, Boise State, Fresno State, and San Diego State, are locked in. I think they will be teams that absolutely will make their way to the Pac-12 at some point here pretty soon. And then I think the other three are kind of up for grabs. UNLV and Colorado State I feel pretty solid about. And then you can kind of toss up the last one. But overall, this is something that they absolutely can do, and it does kind of put them in a precarious situation because being at just 8 teams, what if one team decides to leave very suddenly? What if one team, gets unhappy with the situation they're in and decides to leave? There's a lot of precarious situations, but the reality is they got to start building up. And if you can get to 8 teams before 2026, you can handle that. Then you can deal with the next thing, and that's the whole next battle. But there's going to be so much stuff happening around this, and it could be a really strong group of 5 conference. Maybe they merge with another one like the American. Maybe they just poach more Power 5 teams until they get a little bit more respect. But huge shout out to Teresa Gould, the new Pac-12 commissioner. She came in and just immediately took this thing by the throat and totally handled this, and it seems like they're going to live, which is an incredible thing thinking back even a year to what the Pac-12 looked like. The fact that they're even alive right now is pretty remarkable. But we're going to take our first break here. When we come back, let's talk about who can actually win the national title. We'll talk about blue chip ratio and how it has a big moniker on how important it is to win a national title. So we'll break that down and who can actually win the national title based on this right after this. So stick with us.